There it is. The veil has been lifted. We are back with a smaller crew tonight, and also enabling some new features. As you can see, the chats or in the comments are now actually starting to come on the screen. So we'll see until we start seeing some bad words and racial slurs. We have to turn that off. But hopefully you guys are good people out there.
Cover it up here. Just
not have to really worry. But it's on Nick's. Yeah, Nick, you just got to cover it up. It's on your screen right there, so it's on you, buddy.
I think it's just Nick making all the comments. Like, Jesus, guys, doesn't stop.
Actually, it is covering you up. I'm going to turn that off. There we go. That way we can at least see you. Let's see if that. Yeah. Okay, we're good with that too.
It's up to you. You can try it. I can move this way.
I need you to just scoot a little to the lip. No, it's all good. Yeah, we'll take it off. We want to make sure we don't ruin that beautiful face of yours over there.
Oh, thank you, Kenny.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad you all are able to make it. I can see that it's going to be 1/3 of the Bourbon Pursuit crew tonight. So, but we got all the regulars here, so that's what we need.
No sidekicks for you. What are you gonna do?
I usually have to run the show by myself anyway, and they're just color and Phil. So really, the star of the show is here, so I'm really not too worried about
it. the person that matters is here. So
yeah, could you imagine if I went on vacation, this whole fucking thing would just go under.
We'd never do it again.
No, it'd be like, what's a podcast?
No vacations for you, Kenny.
It doesn't happen. No, it's Ryan's in Montreal. Who knows? He might actually pop in the chat at some point. Okay, but let's go ahead. Let's kick it off and let's run with this. All right. Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's another brand new episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon. It's just Kenny here tonight, as we are going to be tackling something that Ryan and I, we talk about all the time, especially during This Week in Bourbon. It's the whole craze of wheated bourbons and trying to understand exactly why has it gotten so popular. I also want to start diving in and digging into the realm of, between the fellows here on the round table, is to try to figure out, well, what does a wheated bourbon actually mean nowadays? It seems like the term is starting to get a little more loose, and we'll try to see exactly where did that really come from, and what do we expect the future of this going towards as well. But yeah, like I said, just me tonight. Ryan's on vacation. Fred is not here. I'm not too sure where he is, but let's go ahead and go around the horn. And so right here on the screen, that's adjacent next to me, Brian, I'll let you go first.
Hey, thanks for having me again. Happy Memorial Day to everyone. And I'm excited about this topic. At first, I thought it was going to be, what's the deal with wheated bourbon? But just what is wheated bourbon will do it for me. Brian, Sipping Corn, Bourbon Justice.
Oh, don't you worry. We'll get into it. I have a few different ways we're going to take this as well. And that's why I'm actually glad we brought a retailer on tonight. So, Blake, you go next.
Yeah, Blake from Sealbox. Always good to be back. I had to call in a last-minute Hail Mary to make it because I think these are two great topics we have lined up. So, and also I couldn't miss an episode as the Cal Ripken of the Roundtable. So, always good to be back and excited for these topics.
It was necessary. If you weren't going to make it, that's when this whole thing really does start falling apart. That's when the wheels just start coming off. If Blake just starts phoning it in, we know that we've lost him, and this whole thing. It's
like whose mics are we going to try to fix for the first 10 minutes of the episode if I'm not here to provide that bit of effort for everyone? So I get it.
Yes, you're a little bit of troubleshooting we need in our lives. And Nick.
Yeah, and I've been helping with that mic situation, Blake. I've been kind of juggling my setup here with construction going on down in the normal spot. But hey, Nick from Breaking Bourbon here. It's been a minute. I don't think I've been on Roundtable in probably 3 months, 4 months, something like that. So it's great to be back. Great to see you guys, and good to be talking bourbon, and excited for the topic tonight.
I was about to say, what have you been doing for the past 3 months? You've been writing some articles, some more 3 out of 5 barrel articles.
It's tax season or something, It's like people don't know when April 15th is anymore.
People should know not to schedule stuff then, right?
Isn't tax season 24/7? I mean, it's all the time now.
It's not.
Yeah, everyone gets extensions now, so you're spreading it out.
Those are great though. I'll take the normal week, and then you have this Breaking Bourbon on top of that, all kids stuff, all that, it's the 75-hour work weeks. Those will get you, you know.
They will. They'll come creeping up. That's what makes us feel old, is when we start working that hard and all we want to do is sleep for an entire weekend. I'm already there. All right, let's kind of talk about tonight's topic. And this was brought up because of somebody actually talked about they were drinking Penelope Weeded, and we've been talking about Penelope Weeded. And before we get to that, though, I kind of want to talk about understand the craze of weeded bourbon. It's felt like in the past 2 years, it's gone absolutely bananas. But let's start a little bit of the historical context where weeded really came into play, and I think it was maybe like a gateway bourbon for a lot of people too. And that specifically comes from Maker's Mark. Everybody may or may not know that Maker's Mark got some of the weeded recipe, and it might have been passed from Stitzel Weller, and how they actually ended up using that recipe. And Stitzel Weller is some of the best whiskey that's ever been around. For anybody that has been trying to chase after Pappy Van Winkle, I can tell you, at least the guys here on the table can probably confirm with me that you haven't really had a good Pappy Van Winkle until you've had a Stitzel Weller Van Winkle, because that's really what made the brand famous, and that was all about weeded bourbon. It's safe to say that Sazerac has done a very good job of making sure that weeded has played into their that sort of snowball effect too, because if you can't get Pappy, well, it's all Weller. And so Weller starts becoming sort of the next seemingly super huge rising star. But I kind of want to get toss it over to you all. At what point did you start seeing weeded bourbon really start taking off? Or do you think it's always just kind of been there, kind of like in the shadows? It's just now starting to come to light.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least from my perspective, it's always been there. If I look back way back in the Bourboner days, 11, 12 years ago, the first big article I had was the Poor Man's Pappy, which talked about blending two Wellers together and making a poor man's version of Pappy. And people just loved weeded bourbon. And also good timing, a little bit of a selfish plug, but we're releasing our Sealbox weeded bourbon in a couple of weeks. Well, no, 2 weeks. And Brian and I had this discussion this week, where it's like, people always just assume that weeded bourbon's like, oh, I like it because it's sweeter, or I like it because it's brighter. And it's like, well, I'm not going to say that it's not those things, but I think weeded bourbon in general has just had a lot of good variations of it. If you're going back to like the old Fitzes from the 60s, 70s, you're talking about Pappy, you're talking about Maker's Mark. Like, there's always been really good weeded bourbons out there. And it's a way to just say, yeah, this tastes better because it's weeded. And I don't necessarily always think that's the case, but I think we see that to now. We see that these days all the time, because people like old Fitz still, but anything that's weeded that comes out, people automatically jump to and just assume that it's better because it's weeded, and it's just kind of created its own little hype train, or whatever you want to call it. But um, it just is interesting to see, because I think with a lot of weeded bourbons, you see them put side by side with other stuff. I don't think most people are picking them out as weeded. I mean, I think we've all on this table done enough blind tastings to say, like, there's good bourbon no matter what the mash bill is, but weeded continues to be that thing that people just are drawn back to. And I think a lot of that is attributed to Pappy Van Winkle and dating back to the Stitzel Weller days.
Yeah, my first experience with weeded was realizing bourbon could be good, because my first bourbon was when I moved to Kentucky, to Lexington, Commonwealth Stadium. A friend brought in some Jim Beam White Label. I've told this story before, and I thought, God, this is bourbon. This is awful. But then, once I got the student loan check in and had a little bit of money, I bought some Maker's Mark, and I was like, shit, this is good. So right away, my first introduction to bourbon was, oh, the bourbon that has rye in it, no good. The bourbon that has wheat in it, Maker's, is fantastic. Now, I don't understand the hype, to be honest, but that was my first experience. And I think people get on this hype train that Blake talked about, and this Pappy this, Pappy that. It's old Weller this, Weller that, and weeded must be better. When of course it's not, but it gets that hype because I think there's less of it. There's some bad weeded bourbon out there too, but I think a lot of people have had the experience where they've had a fantastic weeded bourbon, and that just helps the snowball roll.
Nick, what do you think? Do you think Maker's Mark started this, or do you think Pappy Van Winkle started this sort of fascination behind it?
Well, I think everybody kind of started it. Yeah, I think with bourbon, is as it always seems to go, is when something's a little bit different or a little bit unique, that tends to be somewhat of a draw. And I think that Maker's is probably the most iconic brand, if you think of that, or at least at one point it really was, with the the red wax top. I mean, they were smart to trademark that, very smart move on their part. Probably a decade ago, that was something that certainly came up when you talk bourbon. I think if you talk now, people have a wider range of what they think about. And then of course, certainly having Pappy in the mix, and of course being fueled by Weller, and the craziness towards Weller as well, that you see out in the market. I think it's just the idea that it's different, that rye is the standard, the norm, and having the story of, well, hey, it's weeded. It's unique from that perspective. That's something we always talk about, is uniqueness. Obviously, it's something we rate on the site on a lot of our reviews. But I think it brings that factor to it. And I think as the market gets more and more saturated with it, it will probably eventually become something that it doesn't really matter or bring that to it. It's just, hey, somebody might think I have a preference towards one, preference towards the other. So we may be seeing, more and more players in that weeded space, now, that may bring that kind of saturation to the market, where it becomes less of a unique attribute and more of just, hey, it's just a detail behind this particular bottle, that I have.
I would say I agree with that, but I feel like weeded, and maybe I'm a little more removed, but I feel like we've been talking about weeded bourbons for a long time, and you would think there'd be more of them out there readily available at this point. We still don't see a ton of brands. I mean, we definitely see some newcomers on the scene. Um, but it is still a little bit surprising with that level of kind of just personal preference, where people will say like, "Oh, I love a weeded bourbon," that more and more brands would be jumping on that. And I guess they are, with all the Weller variations and everything. But I still think back in the days whenever Weller 12 was readily available, it was like, oh, this is a great one because I can mix it and I can drink it neat. And it's like, well, that was kind of dumb. But back in the day, it was, $28 bottle, and you didn't think about it. And it was a good way to explain it. I'd always tell people, I'm like, you think about rye toast, you take a bite of that, it's a little spicy, it's got some different flavors to it. Then you take a bite of wheat toast, and it's a little bit sweeter and more rounded. So it always got a always got preached as like the approachable bourbon, because there's more fruit notes, it's a little bit sweeter. And I think that was true for the weeded bourbon that was available, but that's not true for every weeded bourbon. um so it is funny just to see as these newcomers come on. I'm like, I don't know how this is weeded necessarily, other than it doesn't taste like Weller 12 or anything Weller. It doesn't taste like anything Maker's Mark, but people still like it. That's kind of the funny thing to me with a lot of the newcomers.
Just because it has the weeded name on it.
Yeah, it's just weeded. It is a weeded mash bill, but the majority of the flavors coming from the barrel. Certainly, those grains play a role, but I don't think they're the biggest part of that flavor at the what's in your bottle at the end of the day, by any means.
And I think you could say that especially for the Van Winkle line. I don't particularly get that, that kind of wheat flavor that I get with other brands. There's a lot more oak barrel influence there. I think if people didn't know, I think few would be hard pressed to guess that it was that mash bill, just from that perspective. And I do think that, of course, age generally draws that harshness back. I will say with some of the barrel proof weeded, bourbons, you do get some harshness there, some astringency that I think is, something they have to contend with that particular mash bill, and that you just, when you're in that, say, 6 to 8 year range, for example, there's a bit more of that. Tend to find some acidity, that kind of thing, that tends to be something you see with the weeded bourbons, and I don't necessarily see with the standard ryes. Also, presumably they have a lot more barrels to choose from with the more standard mash bills too, and a lot of these distilleries and producers and so forth. So, drawing still from a smaller supply as well for getting those products out to market.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
kind of your point as well. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to, let me piggyback on that. The younger weeded bourbons, like I love some of the brands that have done it, but a 4-year-old weeded bourbon is really difficult to drink. And I think if you were to put a blind tasting panel together that mixed rye as the secondary grain and wheat as the secondary grain, unless it is a young weeded bourbon, I think most people out there, the vast majority, would never be able to tell you whether they're drinking a weeded bourbon or a rye as the secondary grain, unless it's crazy high rye. That's really going to come through, and you'll probably guess that it's rye. Otherwise, you don't get it. It's just all what you think you're tasting, what experience you think you're supposed to be having. It's really only on the edges where I think any of it really truly comes through.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, most young wheated bourbons, I remember trying a bunch of the young wheats that came out of Willet when they were starting to release their own stuff, and it really wasn't meeting the mark of where I think it probably is today. It's probably a lot better because now they're probably in that 8 to 10 year time frame. But some of them that were hitting that 5-year-old, they just kind of tasted young and doughy. And I was just never a big fan of it. But for some reason, it just seems like weeded bourbon takes a little bit more time inside the barrel to get to that optimal flavor profile.
Yeah, I will, not to backtrack what I said, but I will agree because, tasting a lot of craft whiskey, you get somebody with a 2 to 4 year old rye whiskey that's 95% rye, like that drinks way better in the bottle than at a much younger age. But, it all has its variations for sure.
Yeah. So I guess the other thing that's kind of interesting is that now that we've started to see, maybe you're right. Maybe it's like it's been sitting there all along, and we've been around here long enough that we kind of know, it's been there. But it just seems like more people are getting into this, and they go, I just like weeded bourbon. Or like you say, oh, it's a wheat. It's like, oh, I love weeded bourbon. And maybe it's just because they haven't tried enough yet. But I get it. Everybody kind of has their gateway drug of Maker's Mark, or you get the allure of the Pappy Van Winkle and wanting to get into Weller, and that's what makes you think that you love weeded bourbon. But one thing that's fundamentally changed here, I would say, in the past year, is that everybody loves to display weeded loud and proud on their label now. You've seen it with Penelope. You see HK Young just came out one. Pursuit, we're now guilty of it as well because we put low rye and weeded bourbons as a part of this because we just realized that it's a buzzword and you have to put it on there. At what point do you think Maker's Mark is going to start finally saying weeded bourbon on here because maybe people don't know that it's a weeded bourbon?
I feel like, did Jacob just post our weeded bourbon label on Coming Whiskey? Because I feel like I'm being attacked right now with how big the font of
I'm just
weeded
saying,
is.
but that's the thing. It's like,
But it
I
is,
mean, you fell to it as
true.
well.
Yeah, it's 100% true because it's like, hey, at some point, if you have a good product, but you want to give people what they want, like it's the reason why our age statements are so big as well. Whenever we put something out on the Sealbox Private Reserve, is it's like, hey, that's what people are into. We get the best product and put it in there, but it is. It's a catchphrase. It's kind of like hazmat, not to spill any beans, but maybe hazmat's going to be blasted all over some labels coming up soon because that's what people are into and that's what they're chasing. So it's like, just let them eat cake a little bit. And
What about you guys? You guys think there's like an overabundance of just the word weeded? Do you think it's getting thrown around too willy-nilly because guys like me and Blake are starting to use those buzzwords on our labels now too?
I guess I gotta agree with you. I think you have to. that think of the number of bottles out there. It's a mind-numbing, number of brands and individual releases. Just the mind share to get anyone to just look at it and give it a try, give it the time of day. You got to pull somebody in with whatever you possibly can, and if that happens to be weeded, happens to be one of those terms right now, then great. That's going to get. And look, if somebody hasn't, they don't like it, so be it. At least they gave it a shot, right? A hazmat, kind of funny. Explain that to a non-bourbon person, which I did recently, and say, oh, wait a second. So it's like hazardous material. You can't bring an airplane, but you drink that like directly.
Willingly,
Kind of funny.
you do this?
Right? Well, yeah, willingly, like that. What's wrong with you? But for whatever reason, there's certainly a percentage of us that are, very drawn to it, me included. You see hazmat, and you're just very curious. I can't see there's ever been a whiskey that was hazmat that I wasn't curious about, that I wanted to try. So if there's a large segment of the market that's curious about wheat, and they have a few, samples, maybe they know Maker's Mark they know Weller maybe they've had a handful of others, and they've associated with that, that particular attribute, then by all means, put a little bit in there, as if you're blending multiple mash bills, for example, too, and you at least get the buzzword. I think the reality, though, is like with anything, with any label, with any story, as you get more knowledgeable about bourbon, you start to realize what's really going on there. You start to realize who's making it, how much effort's going into any given bottle, things like that. And that's what really becomes important. But you got to start somewhere, and, having that on the label, by all means, go for it. I think it's great to get people's attention. If that's a buzzword right now, have at it.
I'll throw another one. Brian,
agree.
this is you want to? I was like, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll throw another question your way.
Yeah. Throw it in a second. The only other comment is rye as the secondary grain has got to be 90% of the bourbon that's made out there. And I think it is probably that high just because of Jim Beam White label and Evan Williams being, both rye based and just being so damn much of it out there compared to Makers and the Weller line. So if you're that high percentage on the rye, then yeah, wheat sets it apart. You're going to say it's wheated. You're going to say it's finished. If you did that, you're going to say it's aged on a train. If you do that, you're going to say whatever can distinguish yourself. So yeah, say it loud, say it proud.
All right, Brian, here's my follow-up for you. Maybe for Nick too, because you both don't own brands. Let's say you are starting a distillery right now. Would you start and be like, you know what, we're just going to go all wheated bourbon? Or would you say, let's go ahead and divvy up these eggs a little bit? What do you think?
No, I go rye for the reason we discussed earlier. And I think Blake put the point really well. It's rye is ready sooner. And if I'm starting a distillery, I've got to be, I might even start with a rye just so I can get that out and start making some money. But I'd definitely include a mash bill that has wheat in it for sure. But I'm going to start with rye as my secondary grain.
Okay. So you're just say no. I guess that's the easy one. Nick, what about you, man? Do you think if you were to start this knowing that people are saying in here that the wheated bourbon train isn't going anywhere? I think the buzz is just getting started. We're not even hitting the peak yet. What do you think? Do you think you would lay all your eggs in that basket and say, hey, we're gonna put down wheated recipes here?
So the next Maker's Mark. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you're starting a distillery, you're thinking ahead. I agree with Brian, and Blake, I think said it too, is the younger rye whiskey. It's better at a younger age. I think if you're going all wheated, you're pushing your timetable out quite a bit from where we are now. And then you're also getting away from kind of what ultimately is the fundamental flavor profile. And I mean, knowing what I know about wheated bourbon, I also think you're setting yourself up for a bit of a challenge. I do think that the flavors can be a little harder to manage there. I think, some of that astringency that comes through, and especially at the younger age, I think that would be a challenge for a distiller. So if you're saying, hey, that's all on basically what's hot now in the market, I'm going to distill based on that. No. If I was a new non-distiller producer just sourcing and I got to start with a product now, that I'm going to source, and I'm going to get it 8-year, 10-year barrels and bottle it, I might go start with a weeded, because you got to get something to jumpstart that. Right. So in that situation, I probably would focus on something that's hot right now. And weeded is still pretty standard straight line. It's not a crazy finish, but it is also, notable and a little more remarkable and certainly more unique than the standard rye flavor, rye based mash bill.
That's a great point if you're sourcing, and I agree with that too. If I'm starting out as sourcing, I'm probably going to go wheat.
Another thing that's kind of interesting as I think about this is, one brand that's a wheated bourbon that doesn't probably get a whole lot of love from Luxro is Rebel. I mean, Rebel is a wheated bourbon recipe. It's been around forever, but you're typically playing around the 4 to 6 year range with it, and we've all done barrel picks of it. But it just doesn't seem like that's a brand that has seemed to be able to kind of take off or gain a huge stronghold. I mean, you think there's something to be said about that, or maybe it's just that people don't know that Rebel's a wheated bourbon?
I feel like it had a really strong run when what they start releasing the 10 years, probably five,
Oh yeah,
6, 7 years ago. I
yeah.
feel
They had
like
the black
those
box that came in.
Yeah, those had a really strong run. But I mean, I would probably agree with you that the majority of people don't recognize that as a weeded bourbon and kind of in that same category. Um, and maybe it's something that they should amplify. I think Heaven Hill's definitely done that with the Old Fitz lineup and done a pretty good job. While I think it has some other things about like going into char number 4 cast that kind of throw it off a little bit. But yeah, that's one where I think they could definitely see like a limited, or I could definitely see like a limited release coming of an aged wheated bourbon under that lineup and label that would do really well, especially right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
and
actually started out, sorry, like 15 years ago, they did Rebel Reserve. Does anyone remember that? And they had this whole story on the back that I'm sure they got a cease and desist letter about, but they mentioned Stitzel-Weller and were saying basically they're using the old Stitzel-Weller recipe, yada, 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 yada. So they were really focusing on wheat for when they tried to make it a higher end brands when it was Rebel Reserve. But I'm surprised too that they don't focus more on it being wheat, at least with the 10-year, which the ones I've had have been really, really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and Blake brought up something new. I'll be interested to kind of see how the new Old Fitz 7-year, those kind of new bottle shapes, and how they're gonna start working. I know that people have been buying and flipping them, and most people have said quit doing that because they're going to be littered across the U.S. here if you can just hold out a little bit longer. I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but that'll be a good indication of sort of where does Heaven Hill have in their stocks of it's like a 7-year-old wheated bourbon, and how that's going to start playing into it as well. So I guess the next thing, one of the other reasons why I kind of want to bring this up is kind of talk about, like what is a wheated bourbon? Traditionally, let's go ahead and we'll look at pretty much your Old Fitzgerald, should I say the Old Fitzgerald line, everything from Stitzel-Weller, Maker's Mark, so on and so forth. It's traditionally where that second grain removes the rye and brings in wheat. Now, the thing that kind of struck a chord with me, and I love Mike and Danny from Penelope because they're such good at marketing, but the Penelope wheated bourbon, in my opinion, I look at this and I go like, this is not a wheated bourbon because its mash bill is 74% corn, 16% wheat, 7% rye, and 3% malted barley. And I go, well, they didn't just take all wheated bourbon, they blended this. And so like the secondary grain is just a little bit more than what rye is. I would love to have somebody go ahead and take me at a different like angle with this and sort of like give me an idea of like, why do you think this should even be called a wheated bourbon when it has rye in it?
100%. It's 4
weeded's
grain.
not
Call
a
it.
Yeah, it's a 4
weeded's
grain.
not a defined term, That's,
I know it's like, is this the slippery slope of where we're going? Where we're just like, you know what, whatever. It's got a little bit of wheat in it. It's called a wheated bourbon.
Yeah, no, this one's 4 grain. I'm I'm with you on that. Weeded bourbon means to me, and to Blake's point, there's no federal regulation that defines this. So this is just Brian Harris saying this. It's got wheat instead of rye. I mean, I think that's what we all grew up thinking a weeded bourbon was and what it should be. So they got a name for having 4 grains. You call it 4 grain.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised, to be honest. I wasn't the one that reviewed that particular bottle, of us, but having the 4 grain already, and then basically just kind of changing the name, but swapping percentages and so forth. Yeah, I get it to a degree of kind of, from on the one hand, you're kind of made, they made a name for themselves with the 4 grain, from that perspective. So that's something that they made a big deal about. That was their mainstay product, obviously. And then so kind of saying, hey, we're staying true to that route, that root, but we're gonna just amplify the wheat in this particular instance. I do see that angle too, right? And it definitely is. It's one that pushes that line of, all right, what are we considering a wheated bourbon versus not? And again, it's also in that same realm of just, I don't think people really can taste the difference in most cases. Usually, if you taste the difference, it's because it's not good, and you're tasting that kind of younger wheated bourbon that's not quite right, from that perspective. Otherwise, you're just getting, the sweets and the things that you tend to get with wheat a little heavier than with the rye bourbons from that perspective. But it's interesting, it's like the same conversation about, do you call it straight bourbon finished in whatever X cask, right? And obviously that is a distilled spirit specialty. But, producers and distillers can put that on the label still, and it's really like an informational thing. And we've had that discussion. Do you want to know what's in it? And I would say the one thing with the Penelope guys is they're also very upfront about what the mash bill is, right? So it'd be one thing if they said it's wheated, but then didn't say what it was, and then we later found out, it's really that. But they've come right out and said it, right? So they're pretty open about what that is. So they're kind of pushing the envelope on what it means to be wheated. I think that question, I'm curious what you think too, Kenny, is should there be a line? What should that line be?
I'm just surprised that nobody has called it out. Like, everybody's just like, oh, I love this wheated bourbon. And the first time I read the press release, I was like, but there's rye in here. Like, how can it be considered a wheated bourbon if you have rye in the grain bill? And so my mind was, I mean, I'm still having like a mind blown scenario as you're kind of sitting here watching me like struggle for comprehension on why we even got to this point. But I'm looking at this going, how come nobody is like holding this accountable? Because it's like, I look at them like it's a wheated bourbon, wheated traditionally by what has been set forth by literally a guy named Pappy, said like, this is like, damn fine bourbon. And it's like wheated bourbon. That's just the way things were. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, let's just go ahead and just do a little checkbox here. And then all of a sudden we've got a wheated bourbon too. So I don't know. I kind of look at it and I'm just like, I know where they're coming from, and I know they have all the best intentions. I just look at it from the historical context of going, I don't think this is technically a wheated bourbon. That's just me.
Well, I mean, and I do agree with Nick here a bit, where like I think it makes sense with Penelope's brand story of typically those grains have been reversed and they're 4 grain, so it's like a wheated heavy mash bill. And so that kind of makes sense, but it's kind of something we talked to before where, what is a high rye bourbon? Well, high rye for Buffalo Trace could be 10, 12, well, 12 to 15% maybe, but high rye for Four Roses is 35%. So to me, it kind of falls under that same category if we're talking about, I think we're on this show to get really nerdy about bourbon things. So, um, but when there's no real definition and no real category specific things holding them back, like, yeah, do what helps sell the bourbon the best. So United should just now say weeded bourbon on every label. But it's kind of
I'm
the same.
totally 100% with you now. It's like
We're talking about it for a reason though, like because it gets us excited and like, okay, where is that line? So should weeded bourbon have 0 other additional grains? other than corn and malted barley, which are traditionally in there, or should, and that's like, okay, well, should we also define high rye? Should that be above 20%, 25% rye contents in the mash bill to be a high rye? Um, I think that's the fun part about bourbon is there is a little bit of this kind of gray area for brands to work within, and it's a bit of marketing, it's a bit of storytelling, but kind of just pushes the message forward because we're sitting here talking about, well, they've got whatever it is, 8, 10% rye in there. Is this a weeded bourbon? It's like, well, yeah, it's weeded, so
Look
it
at you.
tastes
Yeah,
good.
I mean,
It's
if it,
I don't
it's
know. I'm
like
on the fence on this one.
it's like the old who was doing the Solera aging? Was it the Blade and Bow? Like just a little bit, just a little bit. So it's like if I just had like an eyedropper worth of weeded bourbon, and I put it in there, all of a sudden my tank is now a weeded bourbon recipe. And if it's less, let's say it's 1% wheat, like at what point are you going to be like, all right, like this whole wheat thing's gone too far?
I think they didn't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
I'd just say I'd love to see that. I want to see that, and I think we probably will.
I was gonna say I think it kind of all proves that it is largely a marketing term. At the end of the day, it comes down to it. If a brand is going to do something and then you later learn that they really kind of pulled the wool over your eyes or just were dishonest about it, that doesn't seem to do well for companies in the bourbon space. I mean, not long term at least. So I think that it's just who's going to push the envelope and how far, and at what point does everyone basically just get immune to it, where weeded no longer holds any value, in which case then you kind of see a total shift to whatever the next thing is that's going to draw people in. And it just happens to be a thing that's drawing people in right now. So I think undefined, we will continue to see that, as we see, we've seen a little bit more on like the foolproof, which is, was very confusing when that first came out. I said, well, wait a second, how's that different than barrel proof? Oh no, it's just proofing it back to what it went into the barrel at. Okay, well, I don't know, probably 95% of people who have had any foolproof product would have no clue what that really means or that that's really what's going on. And they would think it's the same as barrel proof, right? So there's an example there where it's just not regulated, or you don't know. A lot of people probably don't care. Still 125 proof in a lot of cases. That to them is higher than a lot of barrel proofs they've had, right? So I think it's just going to be how long and how far do we see the envelope get pushed on weeded.
That's true, because you got barrel proof, cash strength, all that. You can add water to it. You can still call it barrel proof, even though, I mean, I guess it would be kind of deceiving, but it's true. It's like, they at least put it out there. It's not like they're trying to hide it. I think it would have been probably a lot worse if people were coming back and then finding out later that there's rye in it. But the fact is that there's rye in it. They're calling it wheat. But I'm dumbfounded that nobody else is kind of looking at this going like, well, it's just everybody's calling it weeded and they're going after it because I think the craze of weeded, but there's just this huge, I'm not going to say it's a red flag. It's maybe a magenta flag for me of just like, it's, I don't know. Like I said, it just raises something up in me and I'm just like, I can't get behind it. I know what they're doing. I've tasted it. Tastes great. But if I have to sit there and take a religious stance on it and put a line in the sand, I'm going to say that it's not a weeded bourbon.
Well,
But
what if the rye grain was malted? So essentially, they just have two malting grains that they're using. Do you still take that same hard line?
probably, I mean, it still has rye. I mean, it's at that point, it's true. Like what Brian said, it's a 4-grain. Like that's what you would call it. And traditionally, it's you have 3 grains, and that's what you distill with. And so you swap out the rye for wheat, and that is what it is. And that's now I sound like a crotchety old man because I'm like, you do not adapt. Like this is not the future, my friend. You need to go and stick to the old ways. And maybe I'm just starting to eat my own crow now, where it's just like, it's time to let the veil off. It's like, whatever, anything goes. If you want to go ahead and put some oats in there and call it a weeded oat, go for it. Right. I mean, it's just at this point, just like run with it.
Is there a percentage of wheat so let's say it's 80%, 85% corn, 10% wheat, 5% malted barley. Is that
That's the grain.
I mean that is the grain, but man, like, how much work is that wheat really doing in there? You know?
Probably not a whole
Yeah.
lot. I mean,
Right?
I'd
Not
say
a
you're
lot.
right, but that's still the difference. You know, if you had to go and put something in a bucket, then how you're going to categorize it, that's how I'd do it. And to be fair, maybe it's because of MGP. I mean, I don't know what their stocks look like, if they have pure wheated bourbon where it doesn't have any rye in it, or if they did have some and they said, well, this isn't enough to do a release, and so they started blending it together, or if MGP actually distilled this as a 4-grain and this is what they put out. But I have no idea what the MGP library looks like.
And wheated sounds better than 4-grain, I think. I mean, it's people know, like you said, Kenny, you know, what's 4-grain? They don't know what that is. They don't know what foolproof is. So wheated they know. So that's why you say wheated. But I'm with you. I'm maybe eating that crow with you too. But it's this is 4-grain. It's not wheated. Wheated is when you have 3 traditional grains. Got to be corn, and then you pick rye or wheat.
I can tell you what is wheated, and it's the seal box wheated bourbon that releases in 2 weeks at noon.
If you're not on the text message thread,
If you are not on that list,
you are not going to get it. You're not going to get it.
Big letters, big letters.
What's the mash bill though, Blake? Can you tell us what your mash bill is?
Yeah, so it's 21% wheat. So
There's no room for
whatever.
rye.
I think it's 70, 74, 21, 5, either that or 70, 21, 9. I forget. I'll know that by the time it releases. But
Well, I love that you're just an old school wheated bourbon guy when it comes down to it. So that's you
so,
just answered
some
my
call
question.
it like the next Pappy, but that's just some people. But
Oh man, yeah. I mean, like I said, it's really wrong. I love those guys. I just kind of looked at it and it was just kind of making me think, like, is this where we're going to be going with wheated bourbon, where you can just start putting stuff together and you can throw wheated on it and it's fine, and people are going to start chasing after it. But with all due right, I mean, the guys from Penelope and the brand has been doing phenomenal. So if they're going to put out something, a new label, it's gonna start gaining attention pretty quick with a lot of people that are out there.
yeah, I'd say I take less offense at that, or way less offense than like the whole foolproof thing. Because foolproof cast strength to me, like somebody's expecting that whatever came out of the barrel is what it went into the bottle at. And to me, that feels like way more kind of pulling the wool over people's eyes with they think they're getting one thing and they're not. But
Remember, that's how Ezra picks were. Ezra
yeah.
Brooks, when you used to do an Ezra Brooks pick, it would say barrel proof on the label, but it would be proof down to, I think, 120 or something
Well,
like that.
Rare Breed has an amazing thing where every barrel proof Rare Breed comes out at exactly 113 proof or whatever it is. It's amazing how they nail that with the barrels every time. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Blake, about pulling wool over your eyes, and with Penelope disclosing what the mash bill is. You know, that's not the issue here. The issue is more just, you know, what is, you know, the topic, what is wheated. So I'm not fussy about Penelope because they disclosed the mash bill. But come on, call it 4-grain. That's where I'm fussy.
I also
me and Brian can stay fussy about it. How about that?
Also, I don't think we're gonna see a waves of other brands doing a 4-grain that they call wheated either. I think if anything, that would probably be a challenge for them. I think it's something that's unique to Penelope in a sense. I don't think many others would necessarily do the same thing. I think they'd be more traditional in that sense. It'd just probably be easier for them, easier to get a product that they want using the barrels they have and so forth. Less confusing, I think, overall too. So I don't feel like it's something that's going to push us completely into a whole new realm of what we think of as wheated per se. And then if it did become more prevalent, I think then that becomes a question people really start to ask is, well, what is the mash bill? Now we really have to know, you know, are you putting other stuff in there too? And I just don't see that happening.
Well, sure as shit not, because we're talking about it. I mean, since all the CEOs watch this, they know for sure they are not going to make the same mistake that Penelope made.
That's the
And
great
if you're going
part
to
is
do it,
we
at least
know
put the
we're
Nashville out there.
we know where all whiskey CEOs are spending their Memorial Day is watching us for on the round table. So it's also gives us hope.
It's part of it. I guess that another question as we start kind of rounding this one off, knowing that weeded bourbon has kind of been huge in capturing a lot of the mind share that's out there, weeded whiskey is an interesting one. We've selected one as a part of the roundtable of actually getting one from Old Elk, and selling that and having that. I mean, I've been a big fan of a lot of weeded whiskeys that are out there, and it hasn't. And Bernheim weeded whiskey is another good example of something that's been around for quite a while. It's been really good too. Do you all, and now that Star Hill and Maker's Mark is now releasing their brand new weeded whiskey, do you think that the weeded whiskey category can grow because of the popularity of weeded bourbon, or do you think it's just going to have to struggle and fight on its own?
I think it stays small in relative terms. It doesn't have the bourbon name attached to it. That's really where you want to be. I think wheat whiskey is something that a brand that's matured or curious or just likes to get into different territory. I think that's the brand that's doing something with that. I don't think the market share is going to be huge, and I think it's more of a risk for somebody that's smaller that needs their releases to really hit and be home runs, unless it was just a really small, very, very limited small release. I ones I've had, our pick was fantastic. There haven't been a lot, right? So I have a lot to compare to. But I think that brands would struggle with the same challenges with that younger, wheat whiskey, that even more so with the wheat than with the weeded bourbon. And so just getting it right, getting a good product, I think is the challenge there.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably going to stay small, but I do want to give a shout out. Memorial Day weekend here, just got back from Michigan. I try to find something from Michigan distilleries when I go up there, and I had never heard of Iron Fish Distillery. Nick, have you guys reviewed any of that? I got it's a 6-year bottled in bond, 4 grain, but it's technically a wheated whiskey because it's more than 51% wheat. But it's got.
But can we call it
wheat,
weeded
corn.
whiskey if
Can
it
we
has
even
more
call it
than...
that anymore?
We can, because this one has the legal definition. So to be weeded whiskey, you got to be 51% wheat, just like rye and bourbon. So same definition component there. So it's a weeded whiskey, but it's 4 grain. And 6 years, I thought, well, this is going to be right on the verge of being acceptable, and it was surprisingly good. It's northern Michigan, the Lower Peninsula. I was really surprised at how good this was. So that I agree with Nick, but you see a small distillery in a non-traditional distilling state coming out with a weeded whiskey that's this good, and I think, well, maybe there's room for it. It's a long climb, though. I mean, because look how long rye's been trying to make a play on bourbon, and it's just not happening, and probably never will happen. So in the end, probably stay small, but man, there's some good producers out there in this. This Iron Fish one was really nice.
Yeah, I just didn't think I think rye, just the name, it just doesn't sound sexy. It's like, oh, you got a little bit of rye stuck on your shoe. It's like, it just doesn't have the same kind of connotation that I think, it's like, oh, bourbon, like, that's, it has just rolls off the tongue a little bit better. Weeded, it's popular. It's like, it's a name that everybody can kind of go and jump towards. You're right, though. The rye has struggled to finally, to catch a rocket ship. Every single time people think this is gonna be the year of rye, it doesn't happen. I would love to actually see weeded whiskeys become more prevalent, because I enjoy them. I think they're great. Even though it's not bourbon, but I'll only take a 3 grain weeded whiskey. I'm just messing. But seriously, it's like one of those things that I would love to see that category grow a little bit more, because I love Bernheim wheat. I think it's a great product, especially when, I remember like when you could get barrel picks of it way back in the day. Like those were good times. And even when they had some age-dated ones, those were good. But who knows if we'll see that day again. Well, as we start kind of wrapping this up here, I want to say thank you all for coming in and joining us. We started talking about, like, is weeded bourbon, what's the state of it? I guess we'll have to just kind of come back to this in a year from now and see if we're still in this particular state, or if Blake is sitting on a mountain of bottles he can't sell because the weeded category fell from underneath.
Are we not jumping into our second question? I had so much prepared out of PowerPoint.
What was the second question? Oh no, I said that we're only going to talk about the weeded tonight. The other one
okay.
is we're going to save it for the next time.
Okay. Well, I won't. I'll give my thoughts on weeded, but no, I kind of agree with Nick where bourbon is just still so dominant. I kind of agree with everybody a little bit where I think there's some fantastic weeded whiskeys out there, but for better or worse, people are still just drawn to bourbon, whether it's tequila, whether it's rye, whether it's rum, whether it's Armagnac, whether it's wheat whiskey, people are going to be drawn to bourbon way more than they are to anything else. But that kind of leaves some places on the outside of that target for picking up great stuff like Iron Fish and others who are making really good products, but they're just not bourbon. So they may not have the mass appeal, but it may be kind of a hidden gem that you find along the way. So
Find those gems.
We're gonna see
those
a
gems.
bourbon with wheat, right? No more weeded, with wheat, and then 1%,
Crafted with wheat.
0.5% doesn't matter. It's just a splash, a sprinkle of wheat, right? Somebody's
A
gonna market
sprinkle of
it.
wheat.
Somebody's gonna
A
market
sprinkle of wheat
that.
needs to be the next barrel pick we do. Is
Yeah, the master distiller takes it in the hand and does the old the chef's salt toss into the that's my wheat.
Nick, I've got some samples coming your way this week just for a sprinkle of wheat.
There we go. I want to see the PowerPoint on that too, though.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
complete without the PowerPoint.
Oh man, We'll get to that next question, but no, this is a good one.
That or just we got some 75-21-4. We finished it in a weeded barrel, right? Maybe I put that on the next label that'll come out.
There you go.
Is that a weeded bourbon? Is that a weeded bourbon at that point? Here's my question.
Kenny, you're gonna push the envelope on this.
Michael said
aged
wheat
in a
bag.
weeded barrel.
Oh man, like I said,
Serve
we
it
can
with wheat.
Yeah, we can just start hammering this one really, really bad here. But guys, I want to say thank you again for coming on. Appreciate everybody that came in and joined to jump in the chat, put a few good comments out there. But let's go ahead and start closing it down. Brian, you go first.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to enjoy an Iron Fish weeded whiskey after this because I was drinking the Old Fitzgerald 9-year. Didn't do a whole lot for me, but thanks for having me. This is I'm actually surprised that we got an hour out of weeded whiskey, but the more we talked about it, I realized we could go a little bit longer. So thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Blake, we didn't actually ask you weeded sales versus non-weeded sales. You got that data ready for us?
So we don't have a ton of weededs. It definitely spikes whenever there's something. I guess we'll find out in a week or
About 2
so
weeks. Got
when weeded seal box drops. And no, but I mean, one I didn't even get to mention was a craft distillery that I love, Finger Lakes, which I know Kenny and Ryan source from, which they have some of the best weeded bourbons out there for craft whiskey. I think are available today. I mean, there's some of my favorites among craft or main brands. So, yeah, it definitely adds a little extra hook whenever you say weeded. So, high age statement, high proof, weeded bourbon, all those things just get people's, the hairs on the back of their neck standing up a little bit. So,
and just makes that credit
am I
card
closing out too?
start
You want me to close out on one?
No, you're good. And thanks for giving a shout out to Finger Lakes there as well. Yes, they're another critical partner of ours, and I think we've got maybe almost like 1,000 barrels there, something like that these days. So
all weeded,
all weeded,
hopefully.
man. Yeah, all weeded. Trying to figure out how we'll bring it all in here at some point. We'll drink it all.
Yeah.
And Nick, you go next.
Yeah. All right. Great being on the show. Always fun. Yeah. I too did not know that we'd pull an hour out of weeded, but actually kind of spins into a lot of other discussion points you could have just in general and marketing in general and how terms get pushed in this space and then set new precedents and so on and so forth. So it will be interesting to see how it unravels and what's the next thing from here. But anyways, y'all know where to find me. All the socials at Breaking Bourbon. Of course, the website, we do post one or two reviews a day, breakingbourbon.com. So again, thanks for having me, everybody. Great chat and enjoyable as always.
Absolutely. Well, the next thing it'll be the wheated recipe from Stitzel Weller that was contract distilled at Buffalo Trace. Is 140 proof, and I mean, at that point, you've got a unicorn in your hands.
It's sold.
But yeah, I want to say thank you all for coming on. This was one of those things that this was actually inspired from DJ over at Redbird 101. We were DMing each other a week or two ago, and because people were talking about weed, and I was like, it's not weeded. And he was like, you should take this into a roundtable discussion. I was like, yeah, that's actually a great idea. So tip of the hat to him to how we can start coming up with new and fresh ideas. It's amazing. We've been able to do these 106 times, and we still got a lot of things that we can still talk about here for years to come. But again, make sure you support these guys. Go and subscribe to their newsletters, their subscription blogs, everything like that. If you like what you hear, you can help support us. You can do that through Patreon. You can share this episode with a friend, and you can join on the next roundtable. Just follow us on social media. We have these every single 4 weeks, typically on Monday evenings, and you can be one of the many people here in the chat lighting it up. But with that, cheers, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.
All right. Good job. You guys were surprised we could not talk. I knew we could talk about this for an hour. I think we can.
I did not think that was going to go an hour.
I didn't think we could do an hour on this.
Yeah, I wasn't so sure.
Well, bringing in the controversy of like, is it weeded if they make it a 4 grain? That definitely helps. But yeah, I'm kind of thinking like, hey, in my mind, weeded's always had this hype. Like that's nothing new. And other than Penelope in 2 weeks, Seal Box Weeded Bourbon coming in. Like, but who else is really coming in and leaning into that?
I mean, you had Wilderness Trail. They have a bunch of weeded bourbon that they were laying down.
And their early stuff. I mean, early stuff was if you had their 4-year rye versus their 4-year weeded bourbon. God, so night and day difference.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, like Willits. I mean, I could drink their 4-year rye all day long, and then the 4-year weeded is just like, what is this again? This is bourbon.
Like I'll see you again in 4 years. Yeah.
I
think it'd be if we saw Four Roses suddenly say. I think that would be, that would certainly get people's attention.
They'd be like, we fooled you. All these decades, you fuckers thought we were going to come out with a rye. Nope. We come out with a weeded bourbon.
Distilled by Pappy himself.
So I just took a sip of the wheat whiskey from Michigan, and I've been drinking the new Old Fitzgerald 9-year. This is 1,000 times better than the Old Fitzgerald 9-year.
That's the Iron Fish. What's the proof on that? Is that
it's 100 proof, bottle and bond.
Okay.
And it's 6 years old. That's a pretty good.
6 years old. Yeah.
I traded some messages
much more
with him a little while back. I need to.
Yeah. Try this one out.
All right. I got to go finish packing for our trip. So
you going to Disney again or somewhere else?
No, we're going. It's just like an hour south, but it's like all the families. My brother and sister with all their kids separately. Sounds weird. My sister-in-law with all her kids, and so nothing like 13 cousins all together.
Wow. Nothing will go wrong. I hope
13 cousins from the age of 11 to 3. So lots of bourbon needed.
Bring your bourbon. Have fun.
Hope you're getting lots of arguments about religion and politics.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is I got to go the opposite direction on all that. I'm like, guys, I actually don't believe in what I'm saying, but I just want to see a fight. So you're
the instigator.
All right, I'm going to end the stream real
Florida
quick
man.
So we can
Florida man
finish the upload.
Coming up.
Thank you, everybody that joined in live. Appreciate it, and we'll see you here in a couple weeks.
All right.